Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I see the numbers going up and up and up. We'll give it just a couple more moments for more people to join us before we officially get started. But I'm glad so many people decided to join us tonight. We really appreciate it. Not bad. Okay. Well, I think we'll get started. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to another Bytown Museum virtual talk. Just to let everybody know right off the bat, we are recording this for people who can't join us tonight so they can take a look at it afterwards. So this is the fourth installment of our Beyond Bytown virtual talk series. My name is Steve Mattiusi. I'm the Bytown Museum's Manager of Visitor Experience, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Renee Hayward. Now, before we get going, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The city of Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and the peoples of the Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured this land and continue to nurture this land. Now, as I mentioned, this is the fourth talk in our Beyond Bytown series. It's a series that seeks to bring to light stories that are either maybe a little more contemporary than we usually cover in our museum, or just haven't received as much attention as perhaps they should, or both. Our talk tonight will focus on the history of Ottawa's public transit. And to focus on that, we are pleased to be joined tonight by a wonderful guest speaker, Mr. Paul Henry. Paul Henry is an archivist at the City of Ottawa and began his archival career at the National Archives of Canada. He later served as an archivist at the Directorate of History and Heritage in the Department of National Defence. Dedicated to his profession, he is a past president of the Archives Association of Ontario and a member of the International Academy of Certified Archivists. He also sits on the Standards Council of Canada's Advisory Committee to ISO on Archives and Records Management and the Canadian Council of Archives Board. As a historian, award-winning archivist, and specialist in information governance, Paul has lectured internationally and written on various topics. And in his spare time, he is a licensed amateur radio operator and enjoys traveling. Now, before we get to the main thrust of the evening, before I hand things over to Paul, I'll quickly give an overview of tonight's events. Our guests will start things off with their talk, which will be followed up by a couple questions from Renee and I. And finally, of course, we'll top things off with some audience participation. So for the audience, if throughout the evening you think of a question or a comment you'd like to share with our speaker, please don't hesitate to type out your question or comment in the Q&A function, which you can access via the button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So again, we love to get as many questions and comments as we can, so please don't hesitate to share. And I'd like to thank you all again for joining us. Thank you very much, Paul, for agreeing to participate tonight. And with that, I will hand things off to Paul.
Okay, fantastic. And this is somewhat like Cape Canaveral for Houston, so there will be a slight delay. Here we go. And if I've done that correctly, we should see my starting slide. Thank you. I wanted to take a moment in introducing my topic to say that the text for my talk is based on an upcoming pamphlet being prepared by the City Archives entitled All Aboard, written by Colin Churcher, David Jeans, and David Knowles of the C. Robert Craig Memorial Library. All Aboard provides a capsule summary of the history of rail, including streetcars in Ottawa. And while I will touch on rail to set the context, because of course, rail is yet another mode of public transportation in Ottawa, my talk this evening will primarily focus on streetcars, and I will have something to say about the somewhat interstitial period between streetcars and what we are moving to today, which is LRT. So with that, we'll move to the next slide. So I thought I would start with an iconic image, which some of you may recognize. This is open car number 11. This picture was taken July 1892 in Lansdowne Park, and it is one of the earliest streetcars to be used in Ottawa. Open cars were used during the summer months, and their use was phased out over time. Now, if you look carefully at the image, you can see at the very top that this particular open car ran between New Edinburgh and Bank Street, so all the way down to Lansdowne Park. I have to click on the right spot here. There we go. Railways are of vital importance to move both passengers and freight, and the economic development of Ottawa area industries was linked closely to the development of the railways. Most relied on the rail lines to bring in materials and to send their products to market. And as you can imagine, in the early part of modern Ottawa, rail lines dotted the landscape. They carried passengers and freight in Ottawa to Hull and beyond. And major installations downtown were located on LeBreton Flats, and the land between the P and Point, which is where the art gallery is, and Rideau Falls, where Foreign Affairs is situated today. My next image is of the Canada Atlantic Railway locomotive number 10, which is at the Elgin Street station. Now, on September 13th, 1882, the Canada Atlantic Railway, built by the lumber baron J.R. Booth, was opened from Coteau, Quebec, and the line connected to the Grand Trunk Railway and to Elgin Street in Ottawa, and it provided a fast and reliable passenger connection with Montreal. And it went down Montreal Road. Now, railway bridges, as you can imagine, they dot our landscape as much as rail lines did previously, and of course, the Queensway and other arterials which replaced them served many of the purposes. But what connected many of the disparate areas served by the various railways that were in Ottawa were bridges. The number of railway routes that ran through Ottawa led to the construction of a number of bridges across the Rideau and the Ottawa River and the Rideau Canal. And many of these bridges are still in use today. Some have been converted into recreational pathways, while others are used for cars on the O-train route. In 1871, the St. Lawrence and Ottawa Railway opened two bridges. The Dow's Lake Swing Bridge across the Rideau Canal was built when their branch line into the Chaudière was opened in 1871. And the Swing Bridge was removed with the opening of the Dow's Lake Tunnel in 1967. They also opened a bridge across the Rideau River near the current site of Carleton University. Now, the wooden structure was not painted, and the government condemned the bridge 10 years after it opened, and a new bridge replaced it. And being painted white, it became known as the White Bridge. Now, a steel deck girder bridge replaced the White Bridge in 1914. It now forms part of the route used by the O-train. The Prince of Wales Bridge opened on January 17th, 1881. It was the first railway bridge across the Ottawa River. It was rebuilt by the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1926-27, and the bridge is now owned by the City of Ottawa. This is the Interprovincial Bridge, or Alexandria Bridge, opened on April 22nd, 1901. Provided access for trains from the Pontiac and the Gatineau Valley to J.R. Booth's Central Depot on the Rideau Canal. And in the beginning, and for those of you who may remember the Canadian Museum of Photography, the Canadian Museum of Photography was, once the Chateau Laurier was built, was actually the terminus of the depot for J.R. Booth's rail lines at that time. And in the beginning, the Alexandria Bridge also carried vehicles, pedestrians, and streetcars, and it was converted into a pedestrian and road-only bridge in 1966. Now, the Grand Trunk Central Station, which we now know as the Conference Center, or interstitially as the Union Station, for many years, Ottawa politicians pushed for a Union Station to bring all the railways into downtown Ottawa. And after many abandoned plans, the Grand Trunk Railway finally built the central station on Rideau Street. Now, designed by Montreal architects Ross and McFarland in 1908, the building was completed in 1912. And the same architects also designed Toronto's Union Station, as well as the Chateau Laurier right across the street, and a number of other hotels. Now, by 1920, the central station had become Union Station and was shared by the three other railways. Its monumental Beaux-Arts architecture was a cornerstone of Sir Wilfrid Laurier's plan for a Washington of the North. The station was used as a station until July 1966, and it continues to be used today. Here's another shot of Union Station on Wellington Street, and it was, as I said, Ottawa's railway station from 1912 until 1966. Now, during the first half of the 20th century, Ottawa looked very differently from the way it does today. Railway tracks divided the expanding city. In fact, there were over 250 level crossings. Crossings over the tracks were dangerous, while underpasses and overpasses became bottlenecks for traffic. And the downtown core was still very industrial, noisy, and dirty. There were large rail yards behind the train station on Wellington Street and tracks along the eastern side of the Rideau Canal. And of course, all the way up to the Interprovincial Bridge. And after the Second World War, Prime Minister King asked French city planner Jacques Gerber to design a plan for Ottawa. Now, Gerber was familiar with the city as he had traveled to Ottawa in 1936 and 37 to work on the design for the War Memorial. And the goal was to make Ottawa more aesthetically pleasing and to help control development. Now, there had been a number of plans for Ottawa completed in the years before the war, including the Holt Report in 1915 and the Cochon Report in 1922. These reports made a number of recommendations to have fewer trains running through the heart of the city. Plans included lowering the Canadian Pacific line to the Chaudière, building a tunnel under Dow's Lake, removing the crosstown tracks and yards, and removing the Chaudière rail yards and the rail yards along the Rideau Canal. Here's a shot of rail lines heading into Union Station in 1966. And as you can imagine, we're leading towards talking about streetcars. So from that environment, not only having streetcars dot the landscape, but also rail lines all throughout the city as part of the city's makeup and landscape. Here's another shot of Grand Trunk Union Station. I would say about 1920 or so, with railway lines heading into Union Station. This looks to be a painted photograph. Now, continuing on, talking about the Gerber Report. The Gerber Report borrowed a number of ideas from these plans. These plans centered around cleaning up the city and accentuating the natural beauty of the region. One of the many points that Gerber stressed in his report was that a national capital city should not have large industrial rail yards in the center of the downtown core. In his opinion, the rail lines had to go. And the creation of the Trans-Canada Highway also put significant pressure on the railways to relocate out of downtown. The Federal District Commission, as the NCC was in those days, had the authority to arrange a land exchange with both the Canadian National Railway and the Canadian Pacific Railway. And the FDC would give the railways the land and new facilities for the freight yards in exchange for all the railway right-of-ways through Ottawa. This decision freed up a significant portion of the land that was needed to build the Queensway, which runs along the former Canadian National Line across Ottawa. It also drastically reduced the number of trains coming into the downtown core. 1959, the Federal District Commission and the federal government decided on the site for a new passenger station in Alta Vista, and the freight yards were moved to a site off of Walkley Road, where they continue to be today. Now, the new National Capital Commission undertook the design of the station. The strikingly modern design opened in 1966 in time for Canada's centennial. Now, the station was easily accessed from the Queensway, though no longer as convenient to reach from downtown. New facilities adjoining the station included railway telecommunications, the CN and CP Railway Express facilities, and the postal sorting terminal, which is still there today. The decision to remove the rail lines from downtown significantly impacted the appearance of the downtown core. When the rail yards and the lines were removed, 22 acres of land became available in downtown, and many industries relocated away from residential neighborhoods to be closer to the new freight rail facilities. Colonel By Drive is located on part of the land that used to be part of rail lines and train yards. And after Union Station closed in July 1966, it was used for 1 year in 1967 as a Centennial Center for visitor reception and exhibitions. And in 1968, there were plans to demolish the building, but those plans were put on hold by the federal government to allow the station to be used as a temporary conference center. And as is all things historical in Ottawa, temporary measures sometimes become permanent ones. After 40 years, the former railway station continues to be a government conference center, hosting over 1,200 meetings, large and small, every year, and is now used as part of the center facilities during the retrofit for the center block of Parliament Hill. After passenger rail service was in a state of decline, and during the post-war years, as more people owned cars, and Union Station was located in the heart of downtown in close proximity to the hotels and other destinations in the city. And after passenger rail service was relocated to the new station on Alta Vista in the East End, the number of people using passenger rail service continued to drop as it was less convenient for people to get downtown. And the construction of the Queensway along the former rail line was controversial as it divided many downtown neighborhoods. And the amount of room required for right-of-ways around a highway are much wider than those required for a rail line. In Old Ottawa East, Valentine Park is only 1/3 of its original size. And the home of Robert Lees, the man Lees Avenue is named after, was demolished in order to build the highway. However, in New Edinburgh, the community rallied to stop the highway from being built along the former rail line, and they gained New Edinburgh Park, or Stanley Park, on Stanley Avenue, which still exists today. And as a result, the Vanier Parkway does not connect the Macdonald-Cartier Bridge, and King Edward Avenue became the route for trucks through the downtown core. Let's switch tracks, as it were, and talk about streetcars. This is an 838 streetcar built in 1923. The photograph was taken on George Street, downtown, in April 1953. Now, where does our story begin? It begins even before the Ottawa Electric Railway or streetcars, and actually begins with a horse railway. Public transit came to Ottawa in 1870 when the Ottawa City Passenger Railway began operating from New Edinburgh to the suspension bridge at LeBreton Flats by way of Sussex Drive, Wellington Street, and Pooley's Bridge. Now, the line was approximately 3 miles long, and the equipment consisted of 4 horse cars built by the John Stevenson Company of New York. In spring and fall, the streets became muddy quagmires, and omnibuses with large diameter wheels had to be used. And in winter, snow covered the rails and the streets were rolled hard and smooth to facilitate the use of sleighs. Consequently, the OCPR also had to use closed sleighs to serve their route in winter. On June 29, 1891, the initial run of the Ottawa Electric Street Railway went from the company's barn on Albert and Kent Street, yes, Albert and Kent Street, to Lansdowne Park. Now, the Ottawa Electric Street Railway was owned by Ottawa entrepreneurs Thomas Ahern and Warren Soper. After early careers and some years in telegraphy and telephones in 1888, Ahern and Soper formed a partnership to focus on the emerging field of electric technology. And incidental side note, the very first electric stove was invented by Ahern and Soper, and one of the very first the first demonstration of an electric stove happened right here in Ottawa. The partnership between Ahern and Soper soon became involved in building and equipping streetcar systems in other Canadian cities, and they soon acquired Thomas Mackay's interest in the Ottawa City Passenger Railway and merged the two companies in April 1893. The company was then renamed the Ottawa Electric Railway. And there's a test on all of this nomenclature later, so pay careful attention. The Ottawa Car Company, local Ottawa carriage builder W.W. Wiley built the streetcars for the Ottawa Electric Railway and subsequent systems. 1892, Wiley was commissioned to build snow sweepers similar to the two that the Electric Railway had bought from Lewis and Fowler of Brooklyn. And these two sweepers had shown that, contrary to widespread opinion, winter operation of electric cars was entirely feasible in Canada. After the annual meeting, the Ottawa Electric Railway in June 1893, an initiative to buy the Wiley Carriage Works resulted in the incorporation of the Ottawa Car Company in September of that year. And here is the Ottawa Electric Railway number 18 sweeper car that I mentioned. The large brushes on the front of the car were used to clear snow and ice from the streetcar tracks. An Ottawa invention, this car was built by the Ottawa Car Company. And incidentally, the Ottawa Car Company during the Second World War also went on to build parts for the Lancaster bombers, as well as some of the early training aircraft that were used by the RCAF to train airmen during the Second World War. So the introduction of the electric railway had a major impact on the city of Ottawa. For the first time, people could live in the suburbs and travel to work in a reasonable time and at a reasonable price. Over the next 3 decades, the streetcar fleet was expanded and the number of riders grew as well. They had open cars for use in the summer months and switched to closed cars for the winter. Open cars fell out of favor because of safety concerns, and as ridership grew, new and larger cars were required to accommodate more passengers. During this period, the streetcar network was gradually extended from 22 miles to 46.6 miles, the longest single extension being the 5-mile stretch out to the railway's amusement park at Britannia. And service on Sundays began in 1899. Streetcars were essentially the vehicles of daily mass transit to work, school, recreation, and worship, but they also rose to a grander occasion from time to time. Special trips were arranged for royal and vice-regal visitors to travel to and from Rideau Hall, to golf courses, and to opening of significant buildings. And in November 1893, the Ottawa Electric Railway acquired a contract to carry mail between railway stations, the Queen's Wharf, and the Ottawa River, and the various post offices. The contract was canceled in 1911, and the cars were converted to service cars. In the 1910s and 1920s, during these 2 decades, the area of the city remained roughly the same, but the population density increased rapidly as the city's population grew. The system grew much more slowly, from 46.5 miles to its maximum length of 58.35 miles in 1929. Ridership rose to 36.7 million passengers in the same year. And a number of new streetcars were built during these 2 decades. One of the streetcars built during this time, number 696, has survived and is actually, it's been restored, but and it occasionally shows up at events. In late October of 1929, the stock market crash plunged the world into a major depression. Now, on the Ottawa Electric Railway, ridership dropped. It dropped from 36.7 million to 32 million by 1931. The physical area of the city had not changed, but the population had risen to 130,600. And as ridership declined during the 1930s, older cars were retired. The passenger fleet had shrunk to 118 cars, but the service fleet was stable at 25. The lines were being abandoned, starting with the line to the former rifle ranges in Rockcliffe in 1931. The connection to the CPR station on Broad Street was dropped in 1932. By 1939, ridership had fallen to 24 million, from an all-time high of 48.5 in 1920. The outbreak of war in September 1939 changed the situation drastically. By 41, Ottawa's population increased to 154,000 from 140, due mostly to additional civilian and military personnel. Now, ridership at this time soared to 39.8 million in 41, putting severe pressure on the passenger fleet. And a major event occurred in 1942 when a severe storm shut down the whole streetcar system for 8 days, starting on December 29th. It began with freezing rain, followed the next day by 9 inches of snow between noon and nightfall. The post-war years led to some very serious problems for the streetcar system. The Ottawa Electric Railway Company ran the system as a private enterprise, which caused the company significant financial problems after the Second World War. Under the War Income Tax Act, the company had to pay significantly more in taxes to the federal government than they would have if they were municipally owned and operated. The tax burden on the company left it with very little capital funds to upgrade or expand Ottawa's streetcar network. The company was also reluctant to invest in service upgrades or equipment because they did not think that ridership levels would be maintained at a high enough level to justify a long-term investment. And ridership did stay strong through 47 and 48, but complaints about the system were growing. The streetcars were too crowded and they were never running on schedule. The city purchased the beleaguered system in 1948 for $6 million, $6.3 million, and the Ottawa Transportation Commission was born. In 1950, the city annexed parts of Nepean and Gloucester, increasing the area within the city limits to 55 square miles and the population to 190,812. Ridership reached 40.4 million. 1949, a transit expert named Norman Wilson did a major examination of the public transportation system and was asked to make recommendations about whether streetcar operations should be continued or if it made more sense to implement bus service. He brought forward several concerns. Installing streetcar tracks and lines in new areas of the city would be extremely expensive. Because of the lower population of outlying areas, it was not cost effective to service those populations with streetcars. It was becoming increasingly difficult to find streetcar parts, and in some cases, replacement parts had to be handmade. It cost significantly more to run streetcars than it did to run buses. And there were also concerns about whether the streetcar system would even survive long enough to justify investing in improvements in the system. There were also conflicts between cars and the streetcar system. In many places, cars and streetcars were sharing the same lanes. This impeded the progress of streetcars badly enough to make them run behind schedule. With the increase in the number of cars on the road in the late 40s and 50s, the impact of vehicle traffic on the streetcar system was impossible to ignore. 1959, the Ottawa Transportation Commission was facing a huge debt that was only going to keep getting bigger unless there were major changes. The OTC decided to discontinue streetcar service and convert the entire transit system to buses. The last streetcar ran on May 1st, 1959, and there was a parade looking at the history of public transportation in Ottawa to commemorate the event. At the time, most people were happy to see them go. The overhead wires were removed and the tracks ripped up. And in the weeks following the last streetcar run, there were significant improvements in traffic flow in downtown Ottawa. Buses began to supplement streetcar service in the mid-1920s. They were also used in areas of the city that did not have streetcar lines. By 1950, when Ottawa had annexed portions of Gloucester and Nepean, the city was 5 times larger than it had been in 1949. Public transportation to these new areas of Ottawa was done with buses. And as the city expanded, routes were added and adjusted to serve new neighborhoods. Residents also noticed a significant improvement in traffic flow in downtown neighborhoods with the implementation of bus-only service in 1959. Accessible bus service began in 1975 and was renamed Transpo in 1981. The early 2000s saw the introduction of buses that could kneel and that had built-in ramps to improve accessibility. This style of bus allows someone who uses a wheelchair or has mobility issues to take standard bus routes and improves their access to public transit. One of the most significant changes in bus service in Ottawa was the opening of the Transitway in 1983. As a bus rapid transit system, this allowed passengers to take their local bus to a transitway station, transfer to a major route that could travel across the city more efficiently. The transitway system has gradually expanded over the decades since it was opened in '83 and now serves neighborhoods across Ottawa. Many larger transitway stations have park and ride lots. 1999 saw the introduction of the Rack and Roll program. Buses were equipped with bicycle racks in the summer months, allowing cyclists to bring their bicycles with them as they transferred from their bike to a bus. This program has been expanded, and as of 2021, all buses will be equipped with bicycle racks. After 2 decades of bus transitway construction, much of it in former railway corridors, the Ottawa Carleton Regional Council decided on a light rail project to complement the bus system. 2001, the O-Train began operation on an 8-kilometer refurbished rail line with 5 stations, linking Bayview at the north end to Carleton University at the south end, 2 major suburban employment centers. It made maximum use of existing facilities, a rail cutting west of downtown, a bridge over the Rideau River, tunnel under the canal, and small railway maintenance facilities no longer used by CP at the Walkley Yard. Construction of the line also saw the completely rebuilt of a decaying wooden trestle bridge over Sawmill Creek and minor upgrading of the existing Rideau River Bridge and the Canal Tunnel. A passing track was constructed at the midway point at Carleton University, and new signals were installed. The most innovative station at Bayview, when the tracks were raised 3 meters to reduce walking distance, gave access to the community and increased security. Now, Bombardier's Talent, a German-built diesel light rail train, was selected from among 3 European contenders for its comfort, capacity, and low startup cost. Features included computerized control and automatic braking for safety, and the dual driver cabs and engines for quick reversal and for reliability. The train's interiors featured spaces for wheelchairs and bicycles, wide automatic passenger-operated doors, level boarding from the station platforms, and comfortable seating. And the city established a capital railway to operate the trains under federal regulation and eventually own the tracks, bridges, etc. New federal safety rules were developed to permit one-person operation with automatic safety mechanisms. And here's a picture of an old train, which, as I said, began operating as a pilot project in the fall of 2001. And as one might say, what's old is new again, perhaps. Thank you very much.
Ooh, there we go, unmuted. Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Paul. Transit is, well, speaking to someone who's taken public transit for several years to get to and from work and to and from school. It's such an important part of so many people's lives, and it's always fascinating to learn more about the timeline of events and people that brought us to where we are today. It's kind of funny, like the Ottawa Car Company snow sweeper or sweeper car. I know modern snow plows are probably more effective, but that thing is really cool. And that would be, I think it would be really cool to see that going down the streets after a big snowfall in Ottawa.
It reminds me of the first Roomba. I wasn't quite sure with the robotic, vacuum, whether it would quite do the job, but apparently the snow sweepers were very, very effective.
Yeah.
They prove that we can run a streetcar in Canada.
Yeah, well, that was the other interesting thing was, the idea that they had all this technology available. They obviously understood that winters in Ottawa were pretty rough, and they still came to the conclusion that operation in winter is feasible. That's an interesting little point I'll leave hanging there.
Yeah.
And the other thing I just really quickly wanted to ask about before, because Renee and I do have some quick questions that we'd like to get to, but I found it interesting in 1959 after the last streetcar was running. Did you say they held a parade when the last one ran?
They held a parade to celebrate the streetcars. Yes, the contribution of streetcars, and they had some historic pieces as part of the parade to show the history of streetcars in Ottawa.
That's interesting. I just found it interesting because they're it's almost like at once they're celebrating the introduction of more cars and roadways and things like that, but also giving a pat on the back to the streetcar. I don't know. I just found that funny.
And one of our guests this evening, Dorothy Hill, just mentioned that she was at that parade.
Oh wow!
So shades of Edmund Berkeley. If we were there and we saw it, it must have happened.
Yeah. Now, Renee and I, so as I said, we do have a couple questions just before we get to some audience questions and comments. And as I said at the start, I would very much encourage our audience, if you do have any questions for Paul, to put them in the Q&A section. But I think I'll get us started. Sort of a really broad question, and you can take it however you like. I'm just curious, what has been the most, I guess, enduring legacy of Ottawa's public transit to the development of the city of Ottawa as we know it today?
Well, I think if you look at the history of public transit, in particular, this sort of transition from streetcars to buses and now to LRT, that it sort of moves with the ebb and flow of Ottawa's expansion. And as Ottawa grew and developed and went through sort of the painful processes of growth, as Laurier called Ottawa, he hoped that it would be the Washington of the North. And so as this developed over time, and we went through these painful processes. So we cleared in the 1960s, we cleared LeBreton Flats, and look what we're doing today. We're putting things back on LeBreton Flats. And we're sort of advancing that piece by piece, much like they tried to do with the streetcars, but found that there wasn't always the will to do it. It required the right moment and the right people in place, and that has been true for all of Ottawa's history. The right people in the right place at the right time to move an idea and a vision forward. And I think that's the settling part, I think, of Ottawa's transit history, that it has brought us along. It has kept, at the risk of a bad pun, it has kept us on the right track as the nation's capital.
That's wonderful. Yeah, and I think, that definitely kind of like ties into the next question, with that kind of setting up and taking down of different structures, in particular infrastructure. And I was wondering if you could speak to if there are any tangible reminders of historical methods of public transit that can be found around Ottawa, just as you said with Union Station.
Well, certainly Byron Avenue was where the streetcars went. And so the removal of the streetcars, and now where part of Byron is being reused, it's sort of a cut and cover for the new LRT line. So it's actually, we removed it and we put it back, and we removed it, we put it back. And so you can kind of go there and sort of see the impact. All the rail lines have been ripped up. If you go to Britannia Park, you can kind of see where the terminus was, and you can go there and kind of imagine what it would have been like on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon after church to get on a streetcar and go out to Britannia Park for a little sunshine next to the river. One of the other tangible reminders that always strikes me every time I see it, if you look from Stanley Park towards the Macdonald-Cartier Bridge, you can actually see these cement piles in the middle of the Rideau River, and they've never been removed. Those were the support foundations for the railway bridge when it went up. So there's no Vanier Parkway, it was all a rail line. So it went up Vanier Parkway, through Stanley Park, across these cement pylons, and then across the bridge to Hull. And that's what those are. And they're still there, and they've never been removed. And of course, the Foreign Affairs buildings, those were where a rail turning station was. So there were some rail maintenance facilities where the Diefenbunker building, Diefenbaker building, as well as the Pearson building up on Sussex Drive. Diefenbunker's in a different place. We'll talk about that in another lecture.
Oh, sorry.
I think you're muted, Steve.
We're a year and a half into this, and I still can't take myself off mute at the time. Shame. So you did share so much information with us in the presentation, but I'm always curious, are there any particular stories that you yourself really love to share about Ottawa's history, or transit history, I should say, in particular?
Well, I always think that that history is about stories, and one of the things that I think is missing from our knowledge is a good history of buses, of bus transit. I think that I mean, if we were to crowdsource our community assembled today, we'd get you know, hundreds of stories of notable moments in people's lives when they were on a bus, going somewhere, doing something, and to sort of bring that together in an academic treatment. I don't think the Ottawa's bus network from, you know, for the 40 years of its heyday has really ever been given enough schruck, to be honest. I think we could tell a better story.
Very fair. And we're also just curious, for those interested in learning more about the topic, which we have a lot of attendees tonight, so I assume there are a few people who are interested in learning more about this. Are there any specific records or sources from the archive that you would really highly recommend to our attendees?
Well, certainly our partner organization, the C. Robert Craig Memorial Library, which is the largest private library on the history of rail and streetcars in Canada. It's right at the Central Archives at 100 Tallwood Drive at the corner of Woodruff. So that's a freely available resource for researchers. We also hold the collection of OC Transpo and the Ottawa Transit Commission as well, which includes some fantastic artifacts from the history of OC Transpo over the years. And that's all at the Central Archives. And once we're out of COVIDness, people will be able to come back and go through the collection, and certainly maybe someone will write that nice history of the bus history of Ottawa.
Maybe.
Well,
it looks like, you know what, so I'm glad we were able to get through a few of Renee and I's questions, but I think at this point we'll turn it over to our wonderful audience, who looks like so far have not been shy about asking questions and sharing comments, which is fantastic. So I'll have a look through some of these. So first up, since the streetcar tracks were integrated into the streets, it must have taken a bit to tear those out and fix the streets. So do we know anything about how they might have done that, or how long it might have taken after the streetcars were removed?
It was fairly quick. We contracted it out. One of my staff actually did some research on this a couple of years ago. We actually recovered and recycled all of the steel, which was very interesting. And we have had a little archaeological adventures from time to time, but we actually managed to pull up all the streetcar lines fairly quickly within a number of years, and it was all done very efficiently and all recycled.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from Maurice, just curious, where is that Canal Tunnel that you were talking about?
Well, there's a tunnel. There's a tunnel under Dow's Lake, and under the canal, with respect to where it goes under Dow's Lake. If you take the O train on the way to Carleton University, from where the Canada Post installation is to Carleton University, there's a tunnel that goes underneath there.
Oh, let's see here. From Joyce, were there ever competing streetcar companies running at the same time?
There were not. Actually, what's really interesting about the Ottawa Electric Railway, it actually had a provincial incorporation, and so if you go in the early statutes of the province of Ontario, I think it's 1871, you can find the provincial motion at Parliament to create the Ottawa Electric Railway. So it's actually quite interesting. But there was that transition from from the horse railway to the electric railway. But as I mentioned, it was the same people, really the same people that were kind of merging their companies together. Electricity was a different matter. The competition over electricity, and fire departments were run in that period on a commercial basis. So by the insurance companies. So if your house was burning down, but you hadn't paid your insurance company to have a fire department come and put out the fire, nobody would come. It's kind of severe. And if
Yeah,
there was
severe is
if there was a fire department that was near you, but they weren't paid by the insurance company that insured you, they wouldn't come either. But that's another lecture.
Right. Goodness. Is there much information about the architecture / design of the major transitway stations, for example, Lincoln Fields and the old Baseline station?
Yes, we have all of those records at the city archives.
At the archives.
Or we can provide access to them because a number of them are being redesigned. The Baseline station, the Lincoln Field station, they're all being redesigned as part of the LRT process. In fact, Baseline station's been replaced by the new station at the industry building at Algonquin College. So all the original plans are at the archives. They've all been archived.
Wow. So going on to our next question here, it's about the fares in the 1920s. Do you have any idea of what a typical passenger paid aboard, or what would be the cost in today's dollars?
That's an interesting question. We actually have tickets from those days, and we actually have the tokens. So Steve is going to remind me. I'm going to ask my staff to pull them. We'll take a photo and we'll tweet it out through the Bytown Museum's Twitter account tomorrow. So, but Steve's going to have to remind me. So if it doesn't happen, it's Steve's fault.
Oh, goodness.
No pressure.
I'm going to write that down for a second here.
So perhaps on a bit of a different note, there is talk of, were there a lot of streetcar accidents with pedestrians and other vehicles?
Yes, there were. We have a number of photographs in the archives collection. If you go to our collections site, which is our online catalog, which is Menissus Inc. Or ottawa.menisusinc.com. We can, I think I've got, no, I don't have it on my slide, but
I've got a link right here. I can send it to the attendees.
perfect. If you go there and you type in streetcars, we have a number of images of streetcars that have been in motor vehicle accidents. We did actually have, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to remember my apocryphal story, but Edward Hinchy, who was a mayor, well, not mayor of Ottawa, he was president of council in 1912. He replaced a mayor who had passed away in his term of office, and he refused to be called mayor, and so he was president of council. It's the only president of council we've ever had in the history of Ottawa. He was hit and killed by a streetcar in 1936, I think, on Spark Street, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's one of the more notable streetcar injuries. It took out one of the former mayors of Ottawa.
Jeez, God, no one was immune. A question from Sean. You spoke about the sort of, in quotations, Ottawa transit, but what was the transit like in the towns that now make up Ottawa, the huge city of Ottawa that we know today? And what were the tensions or negotiations as the city and services were amalgamated?
Well, a lot of the Ottawa Carleton Transit was federal and ran regional services. So a lot of those services, once we went to regional government, serviced some of the outlying towns. But in the period probably from the 1920 until, I would say the 1980s, middle of the 1980s, it was buses that were servicing the outlying areas. Many of them as part of the Transit Commission as well, and then the intercity buses as well. We had a robust back. It's strange that we can now say back when we used to have Greyhound, but we had a lot of intercity buses that would move from place to place. And don't forget, the rail lines, as I mentioned, had a lot of. I think there were 5 or 7 locally managed rail lines that went between communities. So Ottawa up to Arnprior, for example, and down through Perth. All of these sort of smaller regional lines that at various times offered passenger service, but also, of course, and obviously, freight service, but they did offer some passenger service as well. There's a very notable in the collection that we have. It's actually in the Bytown collection, strangely enough. There was a sort of teetotaler rally that was held in Arnprior to sort of start the early stages of Prohibition. And the organizers of the rally arranged for special fare on the rail line to take them up to the rally. And so you paid your ticket to join the rally, you got a free ticket on the train, and up you went to the rally. You were there and back in the same day, and you were stone cold sober the whole time.
That's a day on the
Being the Prohibition rally, of course.
Yeah. There is Mike here wrote, are you aware that OC Transpo won the best large transit system in North America in 1987, beating out New York, Toronto, and Vancouver, etc.? If so, would you mind commenting on it?
I did not know that, but I think it's fantastic. I think that there are a number of services that are managed by the city in the former region that are quite striking in their level of expertise. The water system, for example, the ROPEC Center, which is just in Greens Creek area, has won international awards for the quality of our water, which again, one would be surprised. So I'm not surprised that OC Transpo won the award. And I'm surprised, not surprised that more people don't know about it, because I think we're underrated in our celebration of our success in Ottawa. We're too modest at times.
So we have a few that kind of touch on the stories or individuals that were involved in the OC Transpo. So we have one here that says, is there any information about the pay, hours, and conditions for the streetcar conductors? Because as you showed with the first slide, a lot of those systems were quite open, and we all know Ottawa weather.
Yeah, so we have actually in the collection for the archives, we have a lot of the records that kind of document how individuals working, and then it was the Ottawa Electric Railway, it wasn't the city. So we have pay ledgers and things of that nature that sort of give a glimpse into how transit workers in those days were treated and compensated for the work that they did. So it's quite interesting. I think there's a lot of social history that exists within the collection, especially when you look at the some of the artifact collection, talking stories that people bring about, for example, taking the family out to Britannia Park for the day for a picnic by the water on a Sunday afternoon after church. All of those kind of stories really bring home the human side of transit, and that includes all the transit workers who for decades provided that service. As they say about the postal service, through sleet and rain and hail and all that nature throws at us, the transit service continued and continues to this day to provide that service to the ridership.
From Duncan here, this is an interesting one. The rail line from Dow's Lake to Bayview or Le Breton, was that originally a J.R. Booth line, and when was it incorporated into the city's transportation network?
Oh, that was done. Around around the time that and this was the Ottawa region was looking at the pilot project for the O train. And so a lot of those purchases of those lines, including the Prince of Wales Bridge, was done sort of in the late 90s, as well as some of the switching lines that go out to Walkley Yard, which are used for repairs and maintenance to the O trains, because they're a different train from the train that runs on Ottawa's LRT. It's a different train system. Although I understand that it's eventually being transitioned to a similar system.
Let's see here. God, we have a lot of questions.
I mean, just as a comment in the meantime, we did have an interesting from a viewer saying, you did mention car 696, and I'm an OC Transpo employee since May 1978 and retired since 2011, and now coordinator for rebuilding of 696 streetcars as a volunteer. They were saying, hope they'll have it running it soon. So I think that's really incredible. Another little tangible reminder of history that some of these artifacts now still exist.
Right.
There's an interesting one from Colin here. Why did the Ottawa Electric Railway not use the number 7 when they numbered their streetcars?
Oh, that's an obscure question. There's a book written by David Knowles, which is in our collection. Stephen will remind me to check that tomorrow, or have one of my staff check that, because I'm sure the answer is there, and we'll tweet out that answer. That's an interesting question. I wasn't aware that they didn't use the number 7. I'm curious now. Curious. I'll have to go and take a look.
Well done, Colin. That's a good question.
You stumped me for now.
Let's see.
We do have a question here from David. Will the display of Ottawa Railway history mounted by the archives in the City Hall Gallery ever be displayed again?
I think so. I mentioned the pamphlet upon which my talk was based, and that pamphlet is currently being typeset, and we're going to make that available as a PDF to download off the city's website. So that will include the talk that I did tonight, and that'll all be available as a free download. We're just in the middle of typesetting and updating that document, which we put together following our 2010 exhibition, as you mentioned. There's an opportunity always to do these kinds of exhibitions, and some of the interesting opportunities. And of course, we like to partner with our friends at the Bytown Museum as well, and do a number of exhibitions together, and work together to see if we can provide more opportunities for people to see some of the artifacts. So it's not currently on the books, but we're doing other things at the present in relation to transit, and there's always an opportunity in the future.
I do believe we have someone in the chat asking if the All Aboard pamphlet will be bilingual.
Of course it will, and it will be accessible.
So we like to hear.
La même chose disponible en français.
Question from Mark. Can you comment on Ottawa's single trolleybus line, the 2.5-mile Bronson line that ran from December 1951 to June 1959?
Bronson line. I don't know that much about that line, although our reader seems to know a lot more about that line? Was there something in particular that they were interested in knowing about? And again, I'll ask my staff to give a nice answer to that one.
It seems like everyone has their own story or association that maybe is a history that they're more familiar with. So it's quite interesting what we're getting here.
Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating, and I think that everyone has their own streetcar and rail story. I've been from coast personally. I've traveled from coast to coast because I went up to Churchill Falls by rail. And the only pretty well province that I've never traveled on rail on is Newfoundland, because they removed the rail line after, before I got to Newfoundland. So I actually ended up standing on a caboose at the Railway Museum in St. John's, Newfoundland, to have my picture taken. So that way I would technically have been on a rail car in every province in this country. So I think that the transit certainly resonates with everyone. Something that might be interesting, that I'm making a mental note about, is some of these stories, and as I said earlier, history is stories. Bringing together some of the, we'll call in today's social media world, crowdsourcing our memory, right? And it would be kind of interesting to perhaps start to gather some of these stories of people's experiences on transit, and as part of transit as part of their life. There's a book in that, Steve, if you've got some spare time.
Oh, just, yeah, a few minutes a day, I think I could.
Go out to the archives and do some research.
Now, we got so many questions and comments. I hate to be this guy, but I think we're gonna take a few more, because we are just past 8 o'clock right now. But I just, before I get to one, because there is one I have in mind that I would like to go to, I just really want to thank the audience for their participation. This is really great. And again, I think, like both of you said, it shows just the, like you said, everyone has stories, because it's public transit, and I think it impacts, in a way, it impacts us all, even if you drive your car. From Ray, what was Rockcliffe Range line? What was the Rockcliffe Range line abandoned because of the streetcar barn fire at Rockcliffe?
Yes, and what's interesting about that, and this will be my funny comment, about in the old days before codes of ethics and things like that, the board of directors for the Ottawa Car Company and the board of directors for the Ottawa Electric Railway looked similar, and so when the fire happened, there was an immediate order for new streetcars that was placed with the Ottawa Car Company. And interestingly, the people who were on the railway board profited both from the purchase of the cars and from the purchase of the creation of the new cars. So there was kind of money to be made everywhere, in those days. And I won't comment on, gosh, I wonder how the fire at the Rockcliffe yard happened, which is again another lecture.
Oh yeah. Oh, so many opportunities for future discussions on this, I think.
Absolutely. We should keep doing this even after COVID tells us we can go into the world with real people. We should keep doing this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I did also want to mention, I'm sorry to the audience for taking up so much of their time, but I just have to pick up, I think it was a comment you mentioned when the Queensway was being built. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thing because obviously that's such a massive part of transit infrastructure in this city, used by cars and public transit at one point or another. But it's interesting because it does have that sort of, it has a little link to potentially our next virtual talk in June, because and in fact it has a link to my own family, because my mom grew up on Rochester Street. Okay. And a huge part of the Italian Canadian community in Ottawa was living in Rochester and Booth, and they moved out of that neighborhood, shall we say, in the late 60s when a lot of those houses were expropriated.
right.
for the construction.
All part of that narrative, that uniquely Ottawa narrative.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Renee, do you have an eye on one or two other questions that?
Yeah, I did have an interesting question here. So from Nick, I remember in the early 2000s, there was a trolley that ran through New Edinburgh. Was that a private enterprise like Lady Dive, or was it for getting around?
I think that was a private enterprise. I don't think that was run by the city. No.
All those little connections trying to make between, is it private, is it public? Especially, yeah.
Well,
when
it's a good question
cars.
because of the mix between public and private through Ottawa's history. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a question here from Tom that speaks to something that I'm rather interested in. Would there have been any way to have passenger rail stay in the downtown core, or was it simply not possible? He says, I can imagine it would be quite dirty and loud having those lines next to the canal. If you want to comment on that.
Well, I think it was all part of the Gerber plan to sort of change that character of what downtown would look like. I mean, it could have been worse. There was originally, if you look in the Gerber plan, there was this sort of romance with cars, and the suggestion was that the intersection of Sussex and Rideau, that they would actually have an underpass. So Wellington Street would go into Rideau, and then Sussex would kind of go underneath it. And it was all about these sort of interchanges, and they were going to be pulling up the Ogilvy building and where the chapters is, and they were just going to remove all of that, including, I think, part of what would have been the Daily building, and just put these underpasses for this expressway. And I think we made a better choice, not having, because it would be basically turning Wellington Street into the Queensway, which would not have been great from the perspective of people-centered urban planning.
Right. That's incredible. That I can't even imagine that personally, but wow. Okay, I guess gotta give them credit on their bold visions.
But I missed that. I think Ottawa. I mean, to his question, it would still be nice if you could travel from Toronto or Montreal and come directly into downtown, get off your train, walk into the Chateau Laurier or what have you, make other different connections. It would have been nice to keep that, but I think the grand vision really changed how that went.
Yeah, man, it's just incredible to learn about these things. It's so many changes over the years, and some of those changes have been grand enough, and then you hear about these plans that they had that never saw the light of day. And yeah, yeah, that's right. Some of them you think, okay, that's wow, good on you guys. I think we made the right choice.
I think you made the right choice. Yep.
Yeah, man, holy cow. Well, we're about 10 minutes past 8 o'clock here, so we've been going for quite a bit, and I think we've had some really fantastic questions, some really interesting questions about not just about the system, but about the people who ran it, and also some really intricate questions, shall we say, that might require a bit more research in the archives, which is always a good thing, always a fun thing, I think. But I apologize to the people we weren't able to get to every single question. We have saved them though, so we have them on record. And if you are really interested in specific topics, or again, like interested in more resources that you can look for, we'd be happy at the Bytown to keep your questions on hand, or if you want to email us, you can find all our contact information on our website. Email us the questions, and I'm sure we could pass them along to the city archives. And
I can give you, at the risk of getting hate mail from my staff tomorrow, I can give you the email address for the archives as well. Although I think everyone should send a thank you email to the Bytown Museum for presenting the opportunity to have this talk, because I think this was a great idea, especially in COVID. I think it's an excellent idea to connect and try to bring history alive, and anything that does that, I think, is fantastic. But our email address is archives@ottawa.ca, archives with an S, at ottawa.ca, and just send that along. And
I've dropped it in the chat as well, so anyone can check out the chat and be able to access the email, even the website, and of course the online collection as well is available too there.
excellent.
Fantastic. And again, at the risk of hate mail from my staff, all your questions are free of charge. So just please send them along. And if your question is very complex, you may be asked to maybe come in and do a bit of research, and it may take some time to come up with some of the answers. But if it's a relatively straightforward question and we know the answer, we can get that to you in relative speed.
Excellent. Well, and thank you for your kind words, Paul. But you know, wouldn't have been much of an evening without you and without your presentation, without all the information you shared. So really, thank you so much for your presence here tonight and for your hard work to help make this possible. I'd also like to say thank you to Renee for joining us tonight. And thank you, as always, to Rebecca, our Manager of Revenue and Operations and overall Zoom Master, which has essentially become an official title of hers at this point. And if everyone will actually permit me for a moment, I'd actually like to say a special thank you to our Marketing and Communications Coordinator, Matt. This is actually Matt's final week with us at the Bytown. And I think it's pretty darn fair to say he's been such an amazing addition to our team. And I think I can speak for all of us at the Bytown Museum when I say we're sorry to see him go, but thank him for all the phenomenal work he's done for us and for our museum. So as always, to the links for the information for the city archives, thank you again, Renee, are in the chat, so have a look there. And as always, to find out more about our museum and our programs and our collections, or if you feel inclined to make a small donation or become a member, then please do visit our website at bytownmuseum.com. So thanks again, Paul. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us tonight. And I really hope you all have a wonderful evening. So thank you very much.